And then in the letter that Mushnick sends back to Schwartz, there's a line in there where Mushnick says, just because you're not a member of the NWA doesn't mean you can't work with somebody in the NWA to get your talent. So Schwartz
What a bunch of conniving douchebags. And one thing I saw in your notes was this was the before Saturday Night's Main Event that happened in the 80s with Dick Ebersol on NBC. This was the last time that wrestling was on a national television network, right?
Yeah, so what happened was Leonard Schwartz owned the Rainbow Arena, and Kohler was the promoter, right? Well, Schwartz triples his rent and tells him he's going to have to pay triple the rent to have the matches there. At the same time, Dumont signs on the air, and they get their growth going, and they're like, hey, you got this wrestling show, Wrestling from the Rainbow Arena. How about creating a wrestling show for our network? So now Kohler's going to have two wrestling shows coming out of Chicago, one from the Rainbow, which he's in this contentious partnership with Schwartz over, and he's going to have one when he moves over to the Marigold Arena. And Wrestling from the Marigold is the show that really takes off because it's on the Dumont Network. And that's one of the things that puts a big feather in Barnett's cap, because Barnett has the idea to syndicate Wrestling from the Marigold. And that was the last, it was on till I think 1956. And then when it went off the air, there was not another nationally broadcast wrestling show on a network until Saturday Night's Main Event in 1985.
This seems like an impossibility to me. You got Schwartz here who's got Wrestling at the Rainbow, and Kohler is the booker. And then all of a sudden, Kohler signs a deal with Dumont Network to put Wrestling at the Marigold in the same city on television on a bigger network. And he's the booker of both. I mean, that to me, like Schwartz, there's no way there's not a fallout here. I mean, was that the fallout? Was that he had started up?
Yeah.
I don't see how it couldn't be.
So then Kohler, he stops sending talent to the Rainbow.
Of course he does.
Yep.
That's a natural progression.
Yeah, he stops sending talent to the Rainbow, and Schwartz says, okay, and some of this is going to be Mushnick's fault. All right, I'll tell you how this happens. So Schwartz sends off a letter to Mushnick, and it says, hey, Kohler is not sending me talent anymore for my arena. I need to join the NWA because then I can become a booker and I can book my own talent. And Mushnick goes, well, I can't do that because we only have one member office. And this is an important detail that a lot of people overlook. Territories were not members of the NWA. The NWA member was the booking office, and whoever owned the booking office, that was the member. This is going to come into play in LA here in a little bit, right? So Schwartz wants to join the NWA and open his own booking office so he can book his own talent into the Rainbow. And so Mushnick goes, I can't do that. We can only have one member booking office per city. That's in our bylaws, and we got to protect our membership because we're working together from this cooperative, and we can't have that inner competition. And so Schwartz goes, well, okay then. And then in the letter that Mushnick sends back to Schwartz, there's a line in there where Mushnick says, just because you're not a member of the NWA doesn't mean you can't work with somebody in the NWA to get your talent. So Schwartz
what a bunch of conniving douchebags.
Wow. So
every one of them.
So Schwartz reads that, and he goes to Al Haft in Ohio. And he goes, hey, I need talent. And Haft goes, big booking fee. Going to send some talent into Chicago.
And get my talent over.
Yeah, that's right. Because my talent's going to be on Wrestling from the Rainbow, right? On the television show. And he goes, Kohler's going to be a little mad, but it's going to be money, and I'm going to get my guys over, and it's going to get, and when I get my guys over on Wrestling at the Rainbow, I'm going to be able to book them out to other people in the country, and I'm going to make a lot of money here. So it's actually Ray Fabiani and Al Haft, but Al Haft is the booker. So Al Haft sends in a bunch of guys to Wrestling at the Rainbow. And on February the 3rd, 1950, They do 13,877 fans at Chicago Stadium for Swartz, and they do a gate of $53,744.
Wow. This is
Wow.
what year now?
And
That's
who
1950.
and I
Okay.
think this is the card, but I'm going to ask you because I don't want to give it away if it is. Who headlined that?
So that was Jim Londos and Primo Carnera,
And
and
who
they
both are about 80 years old at the time.
and they go an hour draw, one fall
You're
apiece.
kidding me.
Mm-mm.
How old was Londos at the time? Because
I,
his big
I
run was in the early 30s, 20 years earlier.
Yeah, I don't know. I went back to Steve Johnson's book that you wrote the forward for because I wanted to get some background on this, but he stops covering Londos kind of in the late 30s and 40s because his career for being a wrestler. And then he goes into his business stuff. But February 3rd, 1950, it's Londos and Carnera. They go up for a draw, one fall apiece with special referee Jack Dempsey.
Wow.
Holy cow.
Wow.
And they draw
And
53 grand.
and Carnera, his run as the champion was 15, 20 years earlier as well.
Right.
These are
Now-
not young men. These are older guys. I mean, look, I'm not I'm not hating on them.
Right.
It's just amazing that they were still such big draws. That tells you so much about Londos and Primo Carnera.
Well, I'm sure they probably put him on Wrestling at the Rainbow for a couple of weeks before
Sure.
this, right? And Schwartz knows it's going to draw because he goes to the stadium. He doesn't have him at the Rainbow. He does it at Chicago Stadium. And so on the second match from the top is Chief Don Eagle. He's on the undercard. And Kohler sees that. He's like, okay, I got Don Eagle coming in, for me here in a little bit to be with Wrestle Gorgeous George. I'm going to take some stuff out on Don Eagle, and that's how the Chicago short count kind of happened.
This is just amazing to me that these guys, Carnera was a pretty good worker. He made more money in wrestling than he did in boxing, being the heavyweight champion, drawing it. And apparently his matches were no more legit in wrestling than they were in boxing. Because apparently, have you heard the same thing that Carnera
Yeah.
may not have had one legit fight?
Yeah. He's not well spoke of by Luthez.
He was a good worker though. There's an old clip of him from 1937 or something on YouTube.
Yeah.
It's a great match. It's a great match. It's it's old school stuff, but it's like an 8 minute something. Carnero was a good heel. He was actually a good worker.
Now, the downside of this is it looks like there's going to be a heck of a fight here, right? Because Schwartz is drawing this big crowd in 1950. He's got Wrestling with the Rainbow TV show. Kohler's got Wrestling at the Marigold. Kohler's kind of the big dog. And this is kind of the biggest that Schwartz's fire gets, right? He flames out kind of after this, and he
Do you
starts.
think that's a reason he kind of flamed out because he tried to go too big, or what?
I don't know. I mean, you see that a lot, in wrestling where you hit a peak and then there's a dead time, and then if you don't handle it right, that dead time can keep, descending. But and I think too, a couple of things. One, like John said, there's this group of promoters that have all agreed they're going to stick with each other. They're going to stand by each other. They're going to help one another. But because of that powerful television that Schwartz has, they're willing to, kind of overlook that and do what's best for them, right? And then the other thing kind of is that I think that drama and contention, I'm sure Mushnick's on the phone or firing off letters to these guys going, hey, you guys need to cut it out.
Munching was a notorious letter writer, by the way.
Oh,
But
yeah,
Musty
right.
gave him the blueprint.
He did. That one line in there, just because you're not a member of the NWA doesn't mean you can't work with us.
Muchnick started this whole thing. This whole thing started because of Muchnick.
He did.
Yeah.
He talked too much there.
Yeah.
No, he didn't. He talked exactly what he wanted to talk because he was probably getting booking fees somewhere down the line come to him.
So this whole thing causes Kohler to fire off a letter, right? He fires off a letter to Mushnick, and he goes, okay, I've had it. We're supposed to be working together. We're supposed to be, supporting one another. And Al Haft, and he's working with that Ray Fabiani and that notorious Jack Pfeffer, and they're booking guys in here. And I'm in his letter, he goes, I'm resigning from the NWA for obvious reasons. And so then Schwartz goes, "Hey, Kohler's resigned. I guess that means the NWA now is open in Chicago. So here's my membership application." And they take it. They take Schwartz's application. He
Take it
becomes a
back.
member. And then later on, about 6 months or 8 months, when Kohler comes back, to his senses, and he's not fired up and mad, he goes, "Hey, I made a mistake. I kind of want back in." Well, they let him back in too. So then, so then
When they
there's
let him back in, what they do with Schwartz?
they let them both in. They both got to keep
They
it.
broke their own bylaws.
Yeah, they both got to keep it.
What
So-
a corrupt bunch of dudes.
So
Not the NWA.
No, not the hallowed NWA.
So yeah, there's more to this story. So they accept Schwartz's application. Kohler comes to his senses. He then comes back and goes, "Hey, I messed up. I want to be back in. I love you guys. You need to take me back." Mushnick goes, "Okay, I'll put it back to the members." And the member goes, "Well, it's not what we normally do, but Kohler, we need him because he's
No,
got
it's
this."
against their bylaws, actually.
Yeah.
But we need him because he's got this wrestling from on the Dumont Network, and he's got this wrestling on the Marigold, and we've got talent. We need to be on his television. We are going to let him in, and we're not going to kick Schwartz out because he's got powerful television, and we want to get our guys on there too. So, isn't there some way we can all get along and have two members in Chicago? And they don't get along, but they do have two members in Chicago.
So what
Contract-
year was this with when Don Eagle was there and you had Carnera and Jim Londo's headline? What year was it?
1950.
1950. Okay,
Yep.
I just looked it up. Londos was born in 1897, so 53 years old, which back then was significantly past your wrestling prime.
And he probably was in immaculate shape too.
No, I wouldn't doubt that at all. He was probably still a best performer in the world. I wouldn't doubt that either. But when you talk about how he doesn't have much to follow back up with it, talking about Schwartz, that seems like the reason. You drew a huge crowd because of two famous names, but you've got nothing underneath to follow it.
That are not going to do a program. I
That's
mean,
right.
that was a one
You
shot.
didn't build those. You didn't build those names. You poached those names, and you put Londo's name on anything, especially against Carnera with Jack Dempsey. Even at 53 years old, he draws a hell of a house. But he just didn't have much to follow up on it. It seems like.
It sounds to me like, Tony, that TV was used more so to get the talent over than to actually create angles and
because
storylines.
those talent guys were working all over the country.
Okay, that's what I was going to ask you now. It seems like the NWA has their guys, and you mentioned, well, they got the Amerigo TV. We can use. Were these guys contracted to Sam or Fred or
Well,
any of these guys
they were contracted to the booking office.
to the
See,
booking?
all the
so they
booking-
could only work exclusively. And is there any record of what kind of money that the networks were paying out at that time, or how it filtered down to the talent?
Yeah, I haven't really found. We talked about that the other night in
Gotcha,
St. Louis.
gotcha.
I've been looking for that, but I haven't found it yet. But
Okay.
so, for example, if Roy Welch, well, Roy didn't. Let's see. If Sam Mushnick wanted to run at the Keel in St. Louis, and he wanted Gorgeous George, which that's a bad example because he wouldn't have booked Gorgeous, but he would have had to contact Johnny Doyle, right? If he wanted Vern Gagne in St. Louis, he would have had to contact Kohler. So the booking offices control the talent, and we didn't really start getting programs and angles until we got into studio wrestling, because the studio wrestling made things more local and customized, and that's when the booking got more local and customized too.